What's up, everybody? It's Teddy here from Simple Tank, and in this video we're going to talk about how can you buy a house with an underground oil tank. Whether that tank is either active, which means it's currently being used for a heating source, or it's inactive, which means it's in the ground but maybe it's not being used. Maybe it was filled in place with sand or foam. So we're going to talk about how do you buy that house, especially when the seller doesn't want to do anything as far as removing it or taking any responsibility for the cleanup. So how do you protect yourself as the buyer so you don't get caught with a 10, 20, 30, 50,000 plus soil remediation project after you close on the property? So there's two ways to protect yourself. The first way is obvious. You tell the seller, listen, you need to remove the tank and take full responsibility of the cleanup. Now, the problem is a lot of sellers are not willing to do that because they've been living there for 20, 30 years sometimes, and they think that there's nothing wrong with the tank and there's nothing wrong with the property. So it's your responsibility as the buyer. It's a very unrealistic viewpoint from the seller because the thing is, if there is a contamination on the property, no mortgage company is going to want to write a mortgage for a contaminated piece of property, right? So this tank is going to have to be dealt with one way or the other, okay? And today we're going to talk about how do you protect yourself as the buyer. So let's just take the seller out of the equation. Okay, let's just pretend for a minute that the seller is not willing to do anything. So what is your next best plan of action as the buyer to protect yourself so you don't get caught with an expensive cleanup? Okay, now you don't want to go ahead and just remove an oil tank from a property that you don't own. That wouldn't make much sense. First of all, it takes a couple weeks. You have to get a permit. And then if you pull the tank and it winds up that it's found to be leaking, what do you do at that point? You don't own the property or anything. Now you just spent all this time and money pulling the oil tank. So it's not a really good decision to pull the oil tank before you own it. So what do you do next? The best thing to do is to test that oil tank, or better yet, test the soil around the oil tank. Because at the end of the day, we don't really care if the tank is in good condition or it's not in good condition. The main thing that we're worried about is if there's contaminated soil. If the oil leaked out of the tank into the ground, that's what we care about as a buyer, because that's what's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars potentially to clean up. So if you call around the industry for a soil test around an existing underground oil tank, which you're going to get if you call 10 companies, 9 of them are going to quote you anywhere between $400 to $600 to do what's called a soil investigation around an existing tank. And how it's done is it's done by hand. Okay, so there's a technician that comes out with a hand boring equipment. They bore down in 3 sections of the oil tank around the perimeter of the tank, typically around 4 or 5 feet in depth. Okay, and then they're going to take those soil samples, combine it into one sample, send it to a lab, and get what's called a lab result that essentially will be what I call it a yes or no test. What does that mean? They're going to either say yes, it's leaking, or no, it's not leaking. But that is not all we need as a buyer. We need to know more than that. Okay, number one, if they say no, it's not leaking, and the tank and the soil is good, well, that's great, but does that come with a guarantee? That's the next question you need to ask when you're getting these contracts. Because if it doesn't come with a guarantee, okay, and you buy the property and literally a month after you buy it, you go and pull that oil tank and you find that, you know what, that test wasn't accurate. Now I have a $10,000 cleanup. There's no recourse from the testing company. So you could try to sue them and go through attorneys and all that fun stuff, but it's most likely not going to work in your favor. So if that test that doesn't come with a guarantee, you need to make a different decision on the contractor you're going to hire. Now, if they tell you that sample comes back and it fails and there is contamination in the ground, well, the next logical question you're going to have is, okay, well, what is this going to cost to clean up? Well, those testing companies can't tell you what it's going to cost to clean up because they didn't do a full delineation of the contamination. What does that mean? Well, like I said, they just drilled down by hand. They took 3 points of samples, at 3 different points, and they combined it into one sample, sent it to the lab. That doesn't tell us how far down the contamination travels and how far out the contamination travels. Okay, that only tells us at those 3 points that there's contamination. The way that Simple Tank does it, when we come and do a soil investigation at your property, okay, we charge, first of all, $600 to investigate. And what that includes us coming out with a geoprobe if the access is there. So sometimes there's no access for a geoprobe and we have to do it by hand. But if the access is there, we're bringing out our equipment, we're going to drill down, and we're going to get down just below the bottom of the underground tank. Okay, so that's typically around 6 to 7 feet. Okay, and once we get that sample If we find signs of contamination, then what we're going to do with our machine is we're just going to basically hit a button and we're going to find that contamination. How deep does it go? That's the first thing we're going to check. Then we're going to check out how far out does it travel in each direction. And this way we could calculate exactly how much of a contamination plume is in the ground, and then we could determine a fixed price for the cleanup. And what you can do is you can now take that fixed price, you could go back to the seller and say, okay, Mr. Seller, I understand you don't want to deal with this oil tank. I'm willing to deal with it. Okay, I'm willing to deal with the contractor. I found a company that's going to do the cleanup. Okay, my mortgage company doesn't want to now write a mortgage because you have a contaminated piece of property. So what we need to do is we need to have Simple Tank remove and remediate the soils. They're willing to do it at no cost to you out of pocket, okay, up front, and they're willing to get payment at closing. So that way that works is we come in, we do the investigation, we tell you the fixed price, you negotiate with the seller. We then go speak to the seller's attorney, your attorney. We get contracts signed. We go do the work. We clean everything up. We get you a no further action letter. You guys close. We get paid at closing. You get the house. The seller gets the rest of their funds at closing, and everybody's happy. So that is the absolute best way to buy a house with an underground oil tank if it's found to be leaking. Now, if we test your tank and we tell you it's not leaking, and this is an inactive tank, okay, which means it's not being currently used, we also offer what's called a 6-month guarantee. So that guarantee is good for 6 months. It's an additional $1,400 on top of the $600 investigation, okay, but it covers you for 6 months. So if you were to pull that tank a month after you close and you find that we missed the contamination, we completely messed up, well, we're going to cover you no additional cost at all. We're going to do a full remediation and guarantee you a no further action letter for no additional fees. That's a $1,400 fee. Okay, so again, this is if your tank passes the inspection, you have a non-detect result, means no detection of heating oil in that ground, we'll offer you this 6-month guarantee on inactive tanks. You could also use that for active tanks as well, but there's another option. If you have an active heating oil tank, it's currently being used at the property and it's heating the property, the house, we have a product called SimpleGuard. It's a $600 initial investigation, same thing. We come back to you, say, hey, looks like the tank is in good condition, it's not leaking. We offer you a plan, it's $59 a month, and you can carry that plan forever. I mean, you know, however long you want. If you want to continue to use that tank, it's $59 a month, and you're covered upwards of $150,000 in soil and groundwater cleanup. So those are the options that you have depending on, you know, if the tank is active, inactive. Okay, that is the best way to protect yourself. And remember, it's the contract that you're signing and what comes along with that contract as far as guarantees and what's covered. It's not about shopping for price, okay? Because you might be able to find the guy who's cheaper to do the testing, but it doesn't come with any kind of guarantees and it doesn't tell you exactly what the cleanup cost is going to be. In my opinion, it's a waste of your money. So if you guys have any other questions about this process, about soil testing and how to buy your house with an underground oil tank and how to protect yourself, feel free to give us a call and we'd be more than happy to hop on a call with you guys and discuss all your options.